John Dennis is an agency owner, a pilot, and a podcast expert. He ran Podfest, one of the biggest podcast conferences ever. I talked with him about building a successful marketing agency, about burnouts, and about how to actually make a successful podcast. If you enjoyed, remember to hit that like and subscribe button. So you did a project called Podfest. What was it all about?
Podfest was a podcasting conference, actually ended up being the second largest in the world. And I did that with a business partner, and we grew what was a small regional podcasting event into a international podcasting conference that attracted people from all over the world, and really focused on a few core tenets. One being that we wanted to help people get started with podcasting. Mm-hmm. And two, we wanted to help people who are already podcasting not quit. So in other words, help them grow, help them monetize the things that matter to podcasters, you know.
Okay. What do you think, who should start a podcast? Like, for whom is it and for whom is it not?
Yeah. I mean, I think anyone who's willing to talk about their interests, podcasting is interesting because you've got a subset of people who are in business who want to grow their content engines, but then you also have hobbyists, people who like to just talk about an interest. Yeah. And the expectations for podcasting are a little lower. So I think those, if you fit in either of those two buckets, I would encourage anyone who's got an interest, who's interested in speaking or growing an audience, whether it's for a hobby or if it's a business owner who's looking to create a content engine, it really can serve a business in amazing ways. So I would highly encourage business owners to consider podcasting as a content medium to explore. But it's also for people who are just, what we might call hobbyists. Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, I understand that for hobbyists, for business owners, however, especially when you don't have a big team, you have a lot of things to do. So for me, being a business owner, I really need to be careful where I invest my time. Yes. So I go by the 80-20 rule. I want to find the Pareto 20% that make 80% of the difference. And there might be people who will never be good podcasters, even though if they try. How do you see that? Is podcasting really something that's worthwhile when you're growing a business as an entrepreneur or a CEO?
For some entrepreneurs who aren't necessarily good behind a mic or who don't necessarily want to be behind the mic, it might be wise to hire somebody who's the host, who can host the show for you, especially if it's a business show. That keeps you out of the busyness. So it really depends on the personality. There are some business owners who want to be behind the mic. They want to be speaking to people and kind of be the person. I'd say most business owners are that way, but there's also some who like service run businesses, for example, who want to speak directly to their customers. And that might be an example of where it could be wise to just hire your entire crew, including the host.
You can hire the host, you think?
Can. Yes, I believe you can. There are some companies that do this and they do it successfully. Obviously, you got to be careful because that's a long-term relationship. And if you lose that host, sometimes there could be some concern about losing the show. But it's like building anything, right? No one is indispensable. And likewise with a podcast, it's the content that matters. And a lot of times it's the host that brings that content and in meaningful ways. But that is an option. So if there's somebody who's, not particularly great behind a microphone, and they know that, about themselves and they have no desire, but they really feel like podcasting could serve their business well, that's an option.
Yeah. It's so the reason why, for example, I am doing podcasting, even though I have a very tight schedule and I would like to have a little bit more free time, honestly. But still, I think marketing in general is very important. So basically, getting you known is very important. Getting your company known is very important. How do you do that? In my opinion, you can do advertising at the Super Bowl or stuff like that, but there's a lot of advertising out there already, and it's all done professionally with like perfect looking people, et cetera, et cetera. So I think to kind of still be able to grow through the noise and get to the customer is you have to give value to the customer.
Yes.
And how do you do that? You can, of course, if you have a restaurant, you can like hand out free, coupons for a free meal or something like that. But if you have, in my case, it's a software as a service, I think I have to teach people and inspire them and entertain them a little bit.
Absolutely.
And that's my reason to do it. And also, I played around with many forms of content, and I find podcasting very rewarding because you can invite great people like you, and I get to network with interesting people. We talk about interesting things. And when I meet other business owners or great people in general, I tend to have interesting conversations. And I think it would be a waste to just have them for myself and not share that with the world.
Yeah, totally get it. And that's your personality type. And I think a lot of business owners' personality types that way. I'm the same way. And that's how I would prefer it as well. As you probably know too, podcasting is a great way to build relationships with people who you wouldn't have otherwise met. So there's so many advantages. It's not always just about the audience and building up the biggest show you can in the fastest amount. Everyone would love that. But I've built some amazing relationships myself through that medium, through podcasting as well. I'm sure you have as well. And so those are great points. And there's certainly the purpose. If you were identifying, here's my core reason I'm starting the show, and it's to connect with my customers, to add personality to the company, to bring value to them, to inspire them. And then obviously that manifests in retaining of customers and your retention rates, going up. I think that's, one of the main reasons why a lot of business owners would start a show. Yeah. Yeah. And then there are some who, they kind of, they like the ego of it, right? It's like the me factor, and I want to, but then there's also some who it's not necessarily about that. It's about the personal brand, because they understand what building a personal brand does in terms of leverage in the business world, regardless whether you have a SaaS startup or an established SaaS, company, doing, 8-9 figures a year. Building a personal brand is still one of the most leverageable activities I think we could do as entrepreneurs. Podcasting is certainly one of those ways to do it.
Yeah, I honestly admire Elon Musk. He's clearly, like, for me, the biggest personal brand in entrepreneurship. He just entered Twitter. This is crazy. He just announced that he's on the board now.
9.6%.
And I think he has the majority now, right?
Yes. Yeah. Jack Dorsey's got 2.6, 2.4, something like that. Yeah. 2%.
It's pretty wild.
Unreal. Without a podcast.
But still, my inner conflict is sometimes I spend a lot of time with these podcasts and they turn out like, it feels like, okay, it's kind of right, because I need to market and I want to bring value to people and stuff like that. And it's entertaining and it's good, and I get to connect with people, network, et cetera, et cetera. I saw an interview with Elon Musk in which he said, he's spending like most of his time with engineering work and not with media work. And he was like, no, I would never allocate too much time for media work. How do you see that? So he seems to be able to build a great personal brand that's kind of everywhere, and still he claims not to do a lot of media work. How do you see that?
I think Elon is a bit of a unicorn in that he's a man who can work his butt off and through that produce results very fast. And he does big things. He dreams bigger than most, and then he executes on those dreams. And not a lot of people do that. Not a lot of people have the wherewithal to dream big. Everyone dreams big, but then he takes that and he executes on it. And so far, he's done that successfully. I think he's revolutionized the automobile market.
Yeah.
He's beaten NASA
Yeah.
if you know, and so a lot of that comes from, I think, his wherewithal and his tenacity to work and to not let fear stop him, and to imagine the possibilities, to not get caught up with the constraints or the what ifs or the doubts. And so I think the affect of his decisions to go and do and execute on these big things, these dreams that people, you know, even some of the biggest entrepreneurs of our time haven't done, just by doing that is so inspirational that he's amassed this massive following, and he could do that without really having to work at it. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I totally see it that way. So for me, the reason is the topics he's working on, making humans a multi-planetary species and stuff like that, that gets him so much media attention so that he doesn't need a podcast.
Yeah.
Like, it's fine for him to not do a podcast.
Exactly.
Like,
Yes.
I'm not trying to land on Mars, so I need a podcast. That's how I see it.
Right. Seth Godin said, if you want to be remarked about, do remarkable things.
Yeah.
It's very much true with Elon.
Yeah, absolutely. I think he's kind of one of a kind. But,
Yes.
and I wonder, like, how much of that is actually just media and how much of that is real. You know, like how much is it really that he's involved, or is the public perception the real perception? Like, because he's like, my perception is, oh yeah, he's that genius and he does everything and he understands everything then better than anyone in his companies, and it's several ones.
Yeah.
And he works in all of those companies and is present in all of those companies. It's very hard to do. What do you think? How can he get so, or be so productive and do all these things?
I think there's certainly some personality traits that just come built in with Elon, for sure. But I also think he's been led by success. He's stuck with it enough to where his milestones have been met with tremendous success.
Yeah.
So he's trained himself that if I endure, then I will eventually be successful. And there's a lot to be said about that in business, as you know. And so I think he's had enough of those, even through the most hard times that he, you know, when his rockets were going off and he had, I think, enough money just for one more launch, and it was the launch that went off. We can imagine that's incredibly stressful. And so I imagine he's been through the tribulations, certainly the trials, but success, I think, begets success, and you develop muscles where you just understand what pitfalls look like. You know what stumbles look like. You understand, even if you get caught up behind a rock, how to get around it. And that comes with experience. And he's had enough of it early on with those successes that have really pushed him. And I, again, added to some of his personality traits as well. You know, he's a hard worker. I believe he'd said recently he's on the spectrum, has Asperger's. And so there's something to do with that as well. I think he's a very driven man. If you read what his ex-wife said about him.
What did she say?
She just said that he is fiercely, and I'm paraphrasing, but the way I interpreted it was that he's so fiercely dedicated to his work that he just can't stop. He's a workaholic, I think is the term she used. And I think we've all heard those terms once or twice ourselves, but I think he really is a workaholic, and he's just got that personality trait that allows him to stay focused in ways that most don't.
Yeah, I think he's like a perfect combination of intrinsic motivation, intelligence, ability, being at the right time, in the right moment,
That's right.
with the right people. It all combines to kind of an ideal. I think it's remarkable. Have you heard that, like, he is living in a very small, tiny house thing?
I have. He's downsized, so to speak.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot to be said about that. You know, I'm not a minimalist, but I understand why that's appealing, you know. But yeah, I think that's interesting. I think it's interesting when we hear that about entrepreneurs who could pretty much afford whatever they want. right?
Yeah, you mentioned to me that you like the idea of downsizing and minimalism as opposed to, let's say, a lavish lifestyle. What are your experiences with that?
Yeah, I've got a 5,000 square foot house, and it's got 6 bedrooms. And I remember getting that house. I loved it. It was just a wonderful house. It's still our home. Then we bought an RV, and we decided, my family and I decided to travel around the country. And we experienced what it's like to live in this box.
Yeah.
Essentially. And we had so much fun. And it brought us so close as a family unit. We had experiences that we've never had in our life. We traveled, we saw the country, and we experienced different, cultural points of the United States even. And I remember returning home and just kind of looking around and saying to myself, this is so excessive.
Yeah.
Right. And multiple cars in the garage. And so for me, it was an experiential thing. It was going on a trip with my family, living below the means we were at our house anyhow, and really enjoying that, to understand why some people just downsize. It was easier to manage even than the house, right? Being on the road, and you'd think it would be more stressful and more things to do. But in many ways, it taught me that, I can relate to minimalism, and I can relate to people who downsize their homes. And you learn when you make the money and you buy the things, whether they're cars, whether they're houses, whether they're jets, or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
The novelty of those things expire. They wear off.
Yeah.
And then you're left kind of, for some people, in crisis mode, right? Well, now what? Right? This was what I was working for, and that didn't really fulfill me. It didn't really do the thing. It didn't bring joy in the way I thought it would. It was just temporary. And I think that's why a lot of people who make a lot of money, who end up downsizing, I think that's why they do it. I think it's a thing where they're trying to find joy in life. And sometimes I've got friends who have done this too, who've sold all their cars and their homes, and they're living in an apartment in Austin or something, right? And that is what brings them joy. The lack of burden of all the stuff clears the mind and allows them to build and do things that do bring them joy.
Yeah, it's like these things that you own, they kind of own you, because you have to manage them. And even for things, I would understand, okay, it's kind of a burden with cars, multiple cars, which I also used to have. Or I got some cars, to be honest, like 3 or so at the moment. And I love cars. I'm really a car guy. I'm really crazy for cars. However, I'm like, okay, I didn't drive this car for a week, so I need to drive that car now. So it almost becomes like, a duty, like, okay, I'm doing push-ups or something. I have to drive this car so that the car doesn't stand for too long, because it'll break at some point if it just stands around. And especially when you're traveling a lot, like I do, then it becomes even more stupid to have to have stuff like that. And I remember with clothes. With like, I used to like, buy nice fashion brands and stuff like that, and have my closet full of that stuff. But when it became too much, I would just wear the same thing because it's easier. So I didn't even bother to look around what I have and don't have. And I would just like pick the same stuff and, okay, buy a bunch of like t-shirts and just wear them, and I'm fine. And I did not touch the rest. And then I hired somebody helping me to declutter. That felt so good.
Yes.
And I threw away tens of thousands of dollars worth of clothes. Yes. But it and then I could, like see these things again and use them, and I would have more fun. That's crazy.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think, and decluttering, right? When you do that physically, obviously you're also decluttering your mind, and there's less junk around you to worry about. And there's a burden in owning a bunch of stuff. Right?
Yeah. It's basically dopamine. When you buy stuff, you release dopamine, but the dopamine release doesn't happen when you have it and keep it.
That's right.
So you need a new dopamine hit. So you buy more stuff, and this is how you pile up all these things. And these things don't make you happy. So so for me as an entrepreneur, I find happiness in meaningful things. That's why I also do the podcast, because I'm just happy sharing inspiration and inspire people and making them better. And this is where I get the most joy of. Like, clothes are more like a utility for me. I don't like to be naked when it's cold and stuff like that.
That's right.
Yes. But coming back to the podcast, how can I make a podcast really successful? What are the variables and parameters that determine the success of a podcast, in your opinion?
I think it's really establishing a connection with the audience. You got to know who you're talking to first and foremost. A lot of people are trying to talk to more than one avatar or ideal listener, right? And I think that's step one. Know who your audience is, and the value that you provide, make sure that you're putting them first. So consider them just like you would in business. I think that's definitely step one. I would also say consistency is key, right? People who listen to your podcast, they want to, listen to it weekly, right? They want to listen to it, or whatever your release schedule is. I think consistency is also very important. And then the value you provide, I think if you're considering how, questions like, if you're asking yourself, how can I shift perspective of somebody who's listening? How can I offer them a new way of thinking? Or can I inspire someone to adopt a different mindset around the topic that I'm speaking about? If you're asking those questions in service of the audience, I think you're going to make it in that space. And of course, there's all kinds of nuances to podcasting, how you're speaking, and the way in which you're asking questions. You're not talking to a bunch of people, you're speaking to one. It's as if though there's someone at the table, one person. It's the listener. It's not, hey, all you guys, right? There's nuances as well that I think do help and do add up. So those, I think those would be the cornerstones of a successful podcast. And of course, there's all kinds of different marketing angles and things that, someone could do to grow a show, but that's where they'd have to start. If they're missing the fundamentals, it doesn't matter how many interviews you're on yourself or how much marketing dollars you're putting behind amplifying your content. It's just going to fizzle.
So, okay, if you're consistent and if you know like the target group, then it's kind of fine. For me, this is not very easy, because I believe that I am talking with and to a lot of entrepreneurs, like as an audience. And for me, it was kind of hard to determine like one topic.
Right.
Like I could have made this a marketing podcast, but I don't want to just talk about marketing. Like I was trying to decide whether to just talk about a certain subject, and let's say the benefit for that would be like a podcast to be a little bit more positioned and more niche, which kind of makes sense, like marketing wise. But at the same time, I was like, hey, but I want the most interesting conversations. So at the same time, and interesting is for me also to talk about happiness or about, I don't know, Elon Musk or so, which has nothing really much to do with marketing, online marketing or something. So how do you, and I also saw like Lex Friedman, he has an AI podcast. So it's basically about AI, but I saw him so I'm talking about Joseph Stalin with Stephen Kotkin about how Stalin came to power and what he did when he was in power. So that doesn't have to do much with AI. So how do you see like this thing, niche versus going broader according to your interest?
If it were someone who's new, who doesn't already have an audience or a list to promote to, and they're kind of starting from scratch, I would encourage them to niche in a little. I would, as the saying goes, riches are in the niches, right? Once you do that and you build up an audience in that niche, you can start to expand. You can start to go broad, because for a lot of people, that might be, even if it's a passion, that subject might just get a little boring, right?
Yeah.
Especially as entrepreneurs, we're constantly our attention's flying in all kinds of ways. And so we have a lot of different interests. If we're entrepreneurs, we're interested in self-development. Likely, we're interested in technology trends and what's on the cutting edge. We're interested in things like AI, and how did Elon Musk grow such a big personal brand without having any kind of content, right?
Yeah.
So we're interested in these things, but I do think if it's someone who's new, who doesn't again have that audience or anywhere to promote it to, I think starting small is smart. Like getting into the niche is smart. And so I have a friend, his name's Dan Martell. He's got a show where he teaches SaaS, students, like startup people. And good person for you to know if you've not met him yet. I'm happy to introduce
Haven't met him yet.
Yeah. And all he talks about is SaaS. That's all he talks about. The demo and your first salesperson and everything related to SaaS startups. And he's one who's been able to just stay in that, and he's seen incredible success with it because he has a coaching business around SaaS. And so that's an example that I can think of someone who started niched in, and he could broaden now if he wanted to, but I think he's so locked in on that he likely wouldn't with that show, maybe a different show. And then you've got people like John Lee Dumas, another friend of mine who started Entrepreneur on EO Fire, and he teaches his students the same. He says, start small, get niched in, but when you grow your audience, then you can go broader. You can go into other interests. And he's a guy who I think his niche wasn't necessarily the subject. It was the frequency at which he was releasing content. And so no one had ever done a 7-day entrepreneur podcast at that point. And so that was how he kind of niched. And so there's a lot of ways to niche in. If you're doing something different, and, as Seth puts it, if it's remarkable, if it's, I think you've got something, but, so it does depend, but I also understand like where an entrepreneur says, okay, I'm just bored. Or if somebody doesn't need their podcast to be the thing, right? You're a good example. You enjoy this format.
Yeah.
It brings you joy. It also brings value to your listeners, and it creates incredible networking opportunities and new friendships and things. And so you're a great example. And so if someone like you says, I just want to do it this way, and I've got a big list I could promote it to, or you've got an established following, I think that's fine too. It just depends. It's really what I'm saying. And but if you're just starting out, again, smart to niche.
For me, the thing was, I was like, I'm usually someone who does a lot of research and overthinks things and hesitates and procrastinates often. And I was just like, no, I'm not gonna do it this time that way. I'm just going to fire and then aim afterwards. Yeah. I just wanted to say, okay, what's the most important thing for me? The most important thing is to have many episodes.
Yeah.
And how can I have that? By telling my team that we should get all kinds of guests. And of course, my underlying topic is entrepreneurship, more or less. So anything that we talk about, when we talk about, for example, Elon Musk or NFTs or podcasting, the underlying topic for me is entrepreneurship, and that's kind of enough. And I would also talk to artists or sports people, because us entrepreneurs, we can still learn from them because they're specialists in some fields, and
that's right.
So that's fine. And so for me, it was just, how can I get this consistency, and how can I get as many episodes as possible, and then like we'll figure it out on the way where to niche more or less, or etc. Like I hadn't planned to talk much about NFTs, but I recently started because I'm so interested in that topic, and it's also relevant for entrepreneurs, I think. And that's kind of how it evolved. So I was kind of like, I didn't care so much about finding the niche and everything. I just wanted to, okay, let me get many episodes done, and then we'll kind of figure out and not overthink. Yeah. Because I know myself, I'm a perfectionist, and I would never start if I hadn't found the perfect angle. So I didn't look for any angle, really.
I think that's wise. If I'm a bit of the same way, and I've had to learn to just start ready, fire aim, as you put it, because like perfection can be paralyzing, right? As the saying goes. And so done is better than perfect, right? Another good example. And so I think that's a fine example. And I think that's if you know that you're a perfectionist, just start with what you have. You don't need the perfect microphone. You don't need the perfect title of a show, this perfect plan. Just launch your first episode. Just go and just start, I think, is wise advice.
Yeah. And do it over and over again and launch your first episode again.
That's right.
Again and again. And this is the thing, I actually started with a laptop microphone. I didn't care.
Yeah.
My company does 9 figures, but I didn't care. Yeah. I started with like the most simple microphone and like just my laptop cam.
Yeah.
I didn't care.
Absolutely. You just started. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you knew if I let myself be perfect, I'm never going to launch this thing.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Because
and now look at you. This is great.
Yeah, that's a nice room here.
It is very nice.
You used to run a marketing agency.
I did. Yeah.
So why did you stop doing that, and what was your experience with that?
Yeah, we were very successful and had amazing clients and grew from a fledgling agency to a very successful one. And clients ranged from mom and pop, local restaurants and shops and stuff in the early days to multi-billion-dollar conglomerates, international companies. And so we served the gamut and had a wide range of experience. I think for me, I experienced burnout. And it was a combination of things for me. We were very successful with our clients. And, I started wondering if I started a company of my own that was outside of what I'm doing, I think I've got what it takes to build something bigger than an agency. Mm-hmm. An agency it takes a lot to scale in terms of manpower. In the early days, high margins. You might have to work a lot, but it can be high margins, and you get by with a sort of a skeleton crew. Mm-hmm. But soon enough, you're spinning plates as you grow a reputation as someone who can actually, in a sea of marketers who aren't great, and you have a reputation as one who creates results. You get busy fast, and all of a sudden things start to outpace the rate at which you can hire and train, effectively and efficiently. And so, for me, that was the case. It was a matter of scaling or lack of scaling when we were growing so fast and just experiencing burnout. I remember my last quarter of my agency, it turned out about $250,000. I turned everything off. I was so burnt out that money just didn't matter anymore.
What's it like to have a burnout? I haven't experienced that.
Lucky.
Well, like what happens when you have a burnout?
Burnout is just you're working so hard. I would be up and at it by 9 a.m. every day. And oftentimes we'd be in the office till 2 a.m.
Wow.
And that was the norm. And you do that enough and your health starts to degrade. And your perspectives on business even start to change. Your relationships with your own family starts to degrade. Your relationships with friends start to degrade. And that happens long enough, and you get to a place where you're just questioning all of it. And for me, I had adrenal fatigue, and I was so tired all the time. I would not eat because I was so busy, and then I'm so hungry that I was making poor choices with my eating habits. And so I think about that's 5 years ago. I mean, it wasn't that far in a distance, right? And so it's like a reset. When you hit burnout, if it's bad enough, you just want to reset. You're just like, okay, I need a reset. I need to back up. I need to get out of this bubble. And one of the things for me that helped was my wife, actually. I got home at 8 p.m. one day, 8 p.m. Mm-hmm. For most wives, they'd be like, why are you home so late, right?
Yeah.
And I was so proud of the fact that I was home early.
Oh, really?
And I walked in, and we had a son. He's 10 now, but he was younger, obviously, at the time. And so I kind of bust at the door, honey, I'm home. I'm excited. I'm home early. And she didn't reply. She just didn't say anything. And I walked I put my stuff down, walked into the bedroom. She's sitting in bed upright against the headboard. And she's just staring straight off. And I knew something was wrong. And immediately I'm like, oh crap, what'd I do? I'm starting to think about all the possible things that I could be wrong. That I, you know, and I asked her, I said, honey, what's wrong? You know, and she just said, this isn't working. I feel like a single parent. For me, that was a moment that kicked off what I would call burnout. And it was a moment where it really initiated those sorts of feelings and thoughts and realizations. And sometimes we need a loved one or a friend, a good friend of ours, or a spouse or whoever, to just wake us up, to kind of shake us and say, this is not working, right? And so the habits are unhealthy. And so I had to look at, what are my goals? If you're a single guy and you're living by yourself in an apartment and you're minimalistic and all that, and that's what you value, you don't necessarily want a family or kids or to be in a, you know, relationship long term, at least for the time being, then you can go, like, if that I have the capacity to do that. Yeah. But I could do that. But when you start worrying about what your loved ones think and how it's affecting them and how it might affect raising your own child, that can really set in motion some things that make you sit back and ask, what am I doing? Am I being a workaholic? Am I working too hard? And that's, for me, that's how I relate to burnout. That's what happened.
I see. So can you tell some early signs of that? Because, okay, just the long work hours.
Yeah, to avoid it.
Or to avoid it.
Yeah. If I were to go back and think about what were the signals, I think they would be, I noticed pretty early on that my eating habits were changing, that I was not working out. My wife and I used to be in the gym 6 days a week, twice a day, an hour at a time, 2 hours every day, very healthy lifestyle. Now, being an entrepreneur is all about compromise and sometimes sacrifice. And so there's those seasons. But if that's going so long that you start noticing changes that are breeding unhealthy results, that's one way. Your health definitely is, I think, an early sign. And then another is sometimes there's no way to plan for it. Like, for example, if you're scaling a company, and you just can't see around the corner or beyond the horizon. You don't know that you're going to get hit with like 7 new clients all at once. And so as you grow your business, if you notice that your growth is outpacing your ability to scale, that's another warning sign. You want to be very careful about that and get help. Like, you know, have someone in place, an operations person who can help you with hiring and training, maybe slow down, initiate a wait list with your clients, things that I didn't do, I should have done, you know. So those would be some of the warning signs I can think back on myself.
Yeah, I can imagine that marketing agency as a business model is very competitive, and it's very hard, because I also think, like, you know, you kind of depend on the client's instructions as well. So if the client gives you like bad onboarding, probably it's still your fault. And then you're like, okay, there's extra work hours, extra costs. Who's going to pay for that? And if you charge them, then they might be angry and stuff. So that's really tough. And I wonder, how is Gary V succeeding with that? Like, he supposedly has the best marketing company in the world.
Well, Gary filled in a niche, which was like Madison Avenue style marketing agency. Go for the big companies. Yeah. And I've had a foray into that world, and I know what it's like. But Gary, I think what he did was he did not care at all about profits. And I've spent time with Gary up at his office, and we've conversed about this very thing. He did not care about profits whatsoever. Every dollar, he wanted to be at zero in terms of his margin, because he wanted to just pour back into the business. And that was one of his main goals. It was very, it's uncharacteristic of typical entrepreneurs. Typically, we're in this because we want to make money. We want to grow. We want to have autonomy. We want to become free and be financially independent. For Gary, I think he just had enough to get by. and he talks about this. You can hear him talk about this. And he just poured into he just reinvested and reinvested and reinvested. And he would say to some people that, you're not reinvesting in your company enough, and so I think, I don't personally, that's not my thing. I think it's very, very dangerous. It's a slippery slope, but he had obviously insights and signals that I'm sure he had operating accounts and stuff where he was keeping things safe, but that was one of the things that stood out. And so he scaled his team in a way that didn't allow his growth to outpace his capacity. And that's, I think, an important trait for
So he
agencies.
did not make that mistake. So, but he has like, what's it, like 1,600 people or something like that, or 1,000 people team.
Yeah.
So he was able to scale to that size without a profit.
Yeah. And I can't say when he started taking profits or how he parlayed them into the company or how he grew. But I mean, you look at the moves he's made when he moved into his office on the Hudson River there in New York from where he was. That was a major move. That was he had levels of floors, right, where he knew he'd fill them up. So it wasn't just a taking on of that massive new office, but it was also the chairs, so to speak, the positions that he needed to fill, right, with good people.
And what's he like? Is he like he's portraying himself on video?
Gary is amazing. He is just like he is on video. He's probably one of the most authentic people I know.
Okay.
So what you see is what you get when it comes to Gary. There's just no misrepresentations of his personality.
And he didn't have a burnout, right? But he seems like so busy all the time.
I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm sure he's had his moments, you know. He's talked about his family. We've had him speak at a conference a couple times, and he's mentioned, we've done long Q&A sessions. One year he went 2 hours in a Q&A. We shut the hotel down because it was he's so willing to spend time with the audience because he really enjoys it. And I remember, this is on the record, so I'm just gonna, I'll say it. But somebody asked him a question about his family, like, "What about your family? Like, you're such a, you work, and he looks at the camera and he said his kid's name and he goes, "F you," because they're gonna have it made. In other words, right? Because he had to work so hard for it. He had to really grind, and that's the concern as an entrepreneur too with your kids. You're always, worried about, well, how do I instill work, good work ethic into them? But I think he's just in this position where he's got the family that's able to, his wife's obviously amazing because she holds it down on the home front or all the other fronts that she holds down. I can relate with my wife as well. And I think that's a key thing is who you're with and what they're able to endure with as an entrepreneur with you as well. And I think he's just got that part. He's also a guy who I learned goes hard. He's up early and he's up late, right? And he doesn't necessarily tire out. And I think part of that is he's doing what he loves. And he's been able to back himself into a position within his organization where he made sure that he's not doing the things that he really didn't like doing. And so that's a lesson, I think, for entrepreneurs is just, it's the delegation matrix, right?
Yeah.
What do you dislike doing and what are you not good at? Delegate first, right? And I think he really took that to heart as far as I can tell.
Yeah, and he's seemingly running multiple projects successfully in parallel, and so he keeps scaling up even though he doesn't have more time. Yeah. How do you think does he do it? Like what kind of habits does he have?
Gary is a mind. He's a thinker. He's a strategist. One of the best, I think. Yeah. And so he builds the teams. He says, "You're in charge. Who do we need? Let's bring them on. Let's move them here or hire them there." And he puts teams around his ideas, or he invests into existing teams and bets on jockeys. And I think I think that's one of the things he's best at as well. Because we can't do without the team. We can't do without the help. And He's all about sitting in the room at the head of the table saying, here's what I think we should do. And then on to the next thing. And then there's executors, people who get it done, you know.
Pretty cool.
Yeah.
So one thing he did was he's very big with NFTs.
Oh yeah.
Like he's one of the NFT gurus. And so what do you personally think about NFTs?
I think NFTs are one of the greatest opportunities of our lifetime. That's what I would think. I would say about NFTs. It's an incredible technological advancement. If you think about Web3 in general, how NFTs were born, the sort of genesis story with Buterin, the founder of Ethereum, working on another chain, saying this should not just be something that we're creating tokens with. It just shouldn't be something that we're tokenizing, you know, with. We should also create new utility and be able to tokenize, you know, assets and so on and so forth, whether that be art or, you know, other things that you might tie digital provenance to. So I think NFTs, just the technology, putting the art aside and the profile pictures aside and all that stuff, the technology itself is one of the greatest opportunities of our lifetime, if not the greatest opportunity of our lifetime for now.
So what could be possible applications in your opinion? Because we talked about the profile pictures.
Yeah.
I think they're interesting investment vehicles.
Yeah.
Do you own some of them?
I do. Yeah. I've got a couple. I've got a couple pretty popular NFT projects. I did buy a couple Bored Apes, CyberKongs, a bunch of others as well. Pretty deep in the space for quite a while, most of last year and obviously this year as well. And so I've seen it go from this what we called NFT summer to where it's kind of slowed down, and we've had some cycles, and I still think we're still very early overall. But I think what stands out to me is NFTs aren't new. They didn't just come out last year.
No,
they've been out for years. But why did they catch fire? I think what happened was one of the reasons why I think they caught fire was COVID. We had, and I don't really hear many people talk about this, but we had a number of years, I would say, where people stayed indoors more than they usually would.
Yeah.
And so their social interactions, including the way we establish status with one another as a society, had been kind of cast out for a second. And now we've got this new technology with NFTs. There's verifiable ownership called provenance associated to them. Now we're able to tie in these sort of status symbols and this sort of social equity, if you will, into something that's digital. And now instead of me having to come over and drive my Lamborghini down and somebody say, "Ooh, look at that guy," now I could just have my profile photo and a whole, online community could say, "Ooh, look at that guy." So I think status is a big part of why it blew up.
But you could still and some people do it, post pictures of you with your Lamborghini on Instagram or socials. You could still do that.
You could, yeah.
What's different about, in your opinion?
But you can't build communities around those photos.
No.
And I think that's what also was a major contributor to this boom, is now all that said, what was just stated, combined with the community aspect. This is a very, as you know, community-driven space right now.
Yeah.
I love that. And I love it about it. It's fun. It's super fun. And in many ways, it kind of makes you feel like a kid again, right? Because it's, so I think that's one of the big reasons. Sure, there's Lamborghini forums and communities and stuff like that, but they're not novel and they're not new. And I think the shine will wear off of these things, as they do with all things. But right now, it's new, it's novel, it's based on technology that's brand new. We've never seen it together. We've never seen that technology exist. And you combine that with some of the social factors, things that have happened, I think is just one of the reasons why NFTs have gotten so big.
Do you think those NFTs that are now very expensive, like CryptoPunks, Bored Apes, stuff like that, do you think they will still go up in value, or what's your prediction there?
It's hard to say. It is hard to say. My opinion is I think apes are very highly valued right now. I hesitate to say overvalued, but I think they're very highly valued. And there's a couple things. I see both sides. One would be, well, they're priced out. Normal people, they're completely priced out.
Yeah.
Right? So even mutant apes, the derivative that came as a result of owning a Bored Ape and the Kennel Club, those are even priced out. And so some of the derivative projects, and so there's that, but there's also an issue of quantity. There's only 10,000 of them. And I think right now the holder ratio is 57%. Like there's 5.7 thousand owners of those 10,000. So if you think about that, so I see that side too is a matter of basic economics, right? Supply and demand. And so, yes, I do think it has room to go up, but I wouldn't be surprised. And I wouldn't bet on that, is I think what I would say. I wouldn't bet on it. If I was a betting man, I would bet that it doesn't have too much more room. And I think there's going to be a crash with the entire market eventually here. I don't know when, I can't say when, but generally when we see market crashes, and we could talk about, there's the economies, there's a lot going on right now. We're on the precipice of I think a major recession and collapse here. Other things also collapse, right? And so I do think that it will come down at some point. Just don't know when. I wouldn't even speculate. I wouldn't even begin to speculate when that would be.
Yeah, I think because, for example, cryptocurrencies, they all have like regular crashes.
Yeah.
They're all crashing regularly, and I'm talking 85% ish that happens on a regular basis. So why shouldn't it happen to NFTs? Because I mean, I think it can happen to them as well. However, I think that the Bored Ape Yacht Club is doing a good job creating a brand and making it bigger and onboarding celebrities and doing fun stuff with merchandise and events, and they have a great roadmap. Did you see the other side thing?
I sure did. Yeah. You don't even have to be a holder for that. But yeah, I think, there's the people are speculating now about, land, some sort of land drop, right? And that would create a huge boost. You think about market leaders in any industry, regardless of what the market does. And I make those comments with regards to more of the short term. If someone's like a Bored Ape holder and they don't need the money, then I would argue probably just hold. If you need the money, if you could use the money, if you could parlay that money into some sort of asset vehicle that's going to, provide a greater return than the speculation that Bored Apes would, and you don't mind giving up the utility of that project, right? Then that could be the move, right? Depends on, it's situational, of course. But I'm in the position where, I just don't need to sell. I'm not going to, if I'm holding certain projects, I'm not looking at the price every day or every week. Yeah. And if somebody is, I think if you're playing with scared money, then that could be a reason, right? That could be a signal to take profits. And I think that's one lesson that a lot of people should note with the NFT spaces. There's a couple of rules. One would be take profits. Don't forget about your profits, and eyes forward. Keep your eyes forward. Don't look back. Don't look at, if you sold, Bored Apes at 20 ETH, now it's 100. You're like, man, I should have held that. Well, so is the guy who bought Bitcoin at $1 and sold at 20K. You still had a massive ride. Yeah. So there's that as well to consider. I think
that's why you sold your Bored Apes, right?
Yeah, it was just profit. It was just I thought, well, I'll take the profits. It amassed to something pretty substantial, and I don't look back myself and say, well, I wish I would have kept them.
at what, like, how much profit did you make with your Bored Apes, if I may ask?
Yeah, it was about 100x for me.
100x. That's amazing.
So you look at some of these rides, and I've had another NFT project where it was about a 50x, and I ended up not taking profit, and I wish I would have. Okay. And so there's some of those lessons as well. But you win some, you lose some. That's part of this game, right? But I like to look at Bitcoin as an example. Bitcoin, it was just, it rose up to 20,000 in 2017, and then it crashed, and everybody said, that's it. That Bitcoin's done. We're going to see this with NFTs. People are going to, poo-poo NFTs. That's it. It was just a fad. They're just JPEGs. And but I think the projects that are led by very smart people with track records, who have backing by people with track records, especially, will be the ones to rise again. Yeah. And Apes, for me, it's one of the projects for sure.
Yeah, I think they will go up. Like long-term speaking, they will keep their value, in my opinion.
Long-term, I agree.
Yeah, long-term, definitely. I mean, up and down, just like Bitcoin.
Yes.
I think long-term Bitcoin will also be fine.
I agree. And go up pretty substantially. I wouldn't be surprised. So.
All right. So as like a final question, what would you advise new like NFT investors how to get into that kind of space and start investing in NFTs, make money with that?
That's a great question. I think there's a lot of attraction in the NFT space, and there's also a lot of fear because it's new. There's a bigger learning curve to investing in NFTs than there are for many different, like the stock market, for example.
Yeah.
And so because there's a bigger learning curve, I would highly encourage anyone who's new, who's considering investing, to just take a good 30 hours, maybe more, and just learn the technology, spend time in the communities, and don't invest until you do that, until you have at least an understanding of how they work, the risks associated with them. Go back and look at historical movers and look at the charts and things like that, and just really understand this space. And I think people rush into things too fast when it comes to these kinds of investments, and then they just get wrecked. They don't, they're just not diligent enough. It's similar, like if I was a real estate investor and you saw me making millions and millions of dollars with real estate, and you're like, oh man, I'm going to go invest in real estate. You wouldn't just go do that tomorrow. You would spend time in understanding the real estate market. You would understand the various models with regards to, cash on cash returns. You would understand inflow and outflow of population. You would understand, historic rent values and how those are moving. And you would understand, you would put a lot of time in understanding these things. It's the same thing with NFTs. Yeah. And so, and get involved in the communities. Twitter is a really good place to start, and then get into the Discords. And I would say too, go deep, don't go wide. When you go wide and you're trying to just get into as many NFT projects as possible, you're spread too thin. Yeah. Unless you have a team who can handle some of those, keeping up on what's going on with each of those projects, you're going to miss out on big moments that will cost you. It's happened to me. And so right now my strategy is go deep on a few projects that I can really get to know, understand, keep up with. Founding team, really important. Make sure they're doxed. I personally do not invest in any project where these days anyway, where there's just the founders aren't doxed. I want to know who they are. I want to know who's behind the company. I want to know how they're, what are their plans to build a brand? And I'm probably going to sit back and watch post mint to see the movement. I'm not really right now getting into too many mints. There's a few, but my strategy right now is to just kind of let it mint out and then watch to see the movement on the mints. And there's some signals that you'll learn about as you spend time in the NFT space that will indicate whether or not it's a good move. So those would be some of the beginner tips for sure.
I see. Thank you so much. Yeah. when someone wants to learn more about you or wants to get in contact with you, how can they do that the best? How can they find you?
Yeah, thanks. Well, I just started a YouTube channel. It's pretty new. I'm on YouTube as John Dennis, and my social is just at the John Dennis. And so just DM me. My DMs are on, and I'd love to hear from folks who are watching.
Okay, thank you so much, John. It was really a pleasure. Looking forward to next time.
It's been my honor. Thanks for having me on, Sven. Thank you.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode, hit the subscribe button and never miss an episode of Svencast again.